It's time to catch up on Rome. This time, we are talking about Claudius. But first, the quick recap. Augustus, Rome's first and greatest emperor, died in 14 AD. He didn't have a biological son to inherit the empire, and the viable successors within his Julian bloodline had died. So he was forced to name Tiberius a Claudian, his successor, making it the Julio-Claudian Empire. Tiberius was the emperor who snapped when his son died in 23 AD, at which point Tiberius checked out. He hands over governing authority to Sejanus, the Praetorian prefect, the leader of the Praetorian Guard. Tiberius lives full-time at Villa Jovis, his twisted and sadistic pleasure palace on the island of Capri. Sejanus is a power-hungry striver. He convinces Tiberius everyone is out to get him, which is just an excuse to execute for treason anyone whom Sejanus doesn't like or just wants to consolidate their power. Tiberius gets wise and executes Sejanus, but now he is even more paranoid that everyone is out to get him. The executions, now practically daily, are a political purge. This was in the early 30s, the same time as Jesus' ministry and crucifixion. At this same time, a young psychopath named Caligula started living with his uncle Tiberius at Villa Jovis. Making the situation all the more twisted, Tiberius had Caligula's mother and two brothers banished for claiming that Tiberius had Caligula's father killed. Caligula's mother and brothers all starved to death in prison or exile. So, a young psychopath living at the debauched villa of his psychopathic great uncle, who was responsible for destroying Caligula's family. That is a recipe for one messed up dude, which Caligula most certainly was. When Caligula took over as emperor in 37, most people in Rome believed he would be an improvement over the depraved and murderous Tiberius. They were incorrect. Caligula was sadistic, unhinged, and had a god complex. It only took 4 years before Caligula was assassinated by the Praetorian Guard, the personal bodyguards of the Roman emperors, who also acted like the secret police of Rome. The same evening of the assassination, the Praetorian Guard proclaimed Claudius the new emperor, believing they could rule through Claudius as a puppet. Now, on to Claudius. Claudius was born in Lugdunum, Gaul in 10 BC. Lugdunum is now Lyon, France. Claudius was ill as a child, which gave him some physical limitations. He apparently limped and stuttered and generally showed no promise as a boy. Combined with the fact that his brother and sister were impressive and accomplished, Claudius wound up as the family's black sheep, and little attention was paid to him. Augustus never allowed him to enter the political track. Instead, Claudius followed scholarly pursuits, writing histories of the Etruscans and Carthaginians. This is why Claudius didn't get caught up in Sejanus's and Tiberius's political executions. He was so politically insignificant that he wasn't viewed as a threat to take power. However, when Caligula became emperor, he pulled Claudius, his uncle, into the political game. Caligula did not do it out of the kindness of his heart. It was to extort money from Claudius and provide opportunities to publicly humiliate him. When Caligula was assassinated, Claudius was found hiding behind a curtain in the imperial palace. The Praetorian Guard whisked him away and proclaimed him emperor. All of Rome assumed Claudius was just a fool who would be controlled by the Praetorian Guard and probably run the empire into the ground. But they were wrong. Claudius was a competent ruler, especially compared to his immediate successors Tiberius and Caligula. Shockingly, he cared about governing Rome and was the first competent ruler since Augustus. However, Claudius suffered from a lack of people taking him seriously. He was the first emperor not proclaimed by the Senate, had not risen through the political ranks, and wasn't a soldier. So he had no clout. To remedy this, Claudius decided to conquer Britannia, modern Britain. After all, who had tried and failed to conquer Britannia? Julius Caesar. And so, in 43, with 4 legions and auxiliaries, the Romans defeated the tribes of Britannia relatively easily. Claudius returned to Rome triumphant, even though he did nothing except show up after the invasion was basically over. In Britannia, a capital was established at Camulodunum, modern Colchester in Essex. Another settlement, Londinium, was founded in 47, just a few years after the conquest. This is, of course, the founding of London. However, London wouldn't become the primary city in England for another 1,000 years. The Roman story in Britannia has just begun. At this point, they only control a portion of the southeast. The Roman conquest will go on for decades. You see, when Rome first conquered a new territory, it wasn't done and dusted. It took time to absorb the new territory into the empire. They had to set up military installations and veteran settlements, bring in administrators, pacify the locals, start taxing them, and defeat any renegade troops of the conquered people who were harassing their settlements. Then, they continued pressing the border further and started the process all over again. In Rome, Claudius busied himself as an administrator of the empire. He reorganized the administration of several provinces, placing them under direct Roman control. He took an interest in judicial affairs, sitting as judge for many cases tried during his tenure, and passing laws that increased the efficiency of the judicial system. He passed many edicts and on all sorts of topics, including reaffirming the rights of all Jews in the empire. Though, as we touched on in the last episode, in 49, he banished all the Jews from Rome, the city, not the empire. Suetonius wrote about Claudius's expulsion. As the Jews were making constant disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he expelled them from Rome. Apparently, Christian missionaries to the Jews in Rome were causing dissension, so Claudius booted them from the city. That is how Priscilla and Aquila find their way from Rome to Corinth, where they meet Paul on his second missionary journey. Claudius also spent his reign on public works projects, building aqueducts, new roads and canals, and a new port cleverly named Portus, near the original port of Ostia. Although Claudius isn't remembered for building monumental buildings like the Pantheon or Colosseum, he did the vital work of maintaining and expanding Rome's infrastructure network throughout the empire. That infrastructure allowed Rome to rule such a vast territory for many centuries. It's not always great being a Roman emperor, as you'd imagine. Claudius spent his entire reign dodging assassination plots. It was practically part of his daily routine. He cleaned out of the Senate those suspected of plotting against his life, and there were many. In the place of the deposed or executed senators, Claudius brought in men from Gaul, whom the old Italian families believed were nothing more than barbarians. Imagine the horror that men with aristocratic Roman bloodlines had to share a Senate chamber with men born north of the Alps. Well, it was a horror to their sensibilities. Claudius was also not very successful in his private life. He went through 4 wives, and at least 2 tried to kill him, with one being successful. In 48, while Claudius was away from Rome, Messalina, Claudius's 3rd wife, married her lover. Yes, Claudius and Messalina were still married. Messalina's plan was simple: marry her lover, murder Claudius, and replace Claudius with her new husband. Of course, this was a dumb plan that got her executed. Claudius replaced Messalina with wife number 4, Julia Agrippina, his niece. That's right, his brother's daughter. Fortunately, the people of Rome were just as appalled by this as we are. And the incest wasn't the only bad thing that came out of this marriage. Agrippina used the marriage to position her son as Claudius's successor over Claudius's son, Britannicus. Agrippina's son, Lucius, is known to history as Nero. But for now, he's just a 13-year-old boy. Agrippina saw that once Britannicus came of age, Claudius's need for her and Nero would dry up, because Britannicus would be the heir and Nero would just be a threat to Britannicus. Agrippina's hard work getting Nero into position would come to nothing. So Agrippina took action. In October of 53, she poisoned Claudius, possibly using his official taster or his doctor to slip him the poison. Claudius was 63 years old and had ruled Rome for 13 years. Claudius, whom no one thought would ever amount to anything in life, accidentally wound up as the emperor of Rome. He was a decent ruler, even if he was no Augustus. He was an able administrator, brought a new province, Britannia, into the empire, and didn't make any catastrophic decisions. Even if he wasn't an inspiring figure like Augustus, the empire was better off for his reign. The next time we check in on Rome, we will turn to Nero, who will make a valiant effort to unseat Caligula for the title of worst emperor in Rome's history.